Around 1000 CE, in a time period known as the High Middle Ages, the pace of change suddenly picked up very quickly in Europe due to one, less outside invasion and increased stability, and two, better climatic conditions. There was a warmer climate after 750, which reached a peak in the 11th and 12th centuries and enhanced agricultural production. This time period also sees the Crusades, which we will cover in a separate lecture later on. The expansion and growth in population of towns and cities led to more specialization of trade and the creation of guilds, or associations of craftsmen in a particular trade. There were two types of guilds: merchant guilds and craft guilds. You had to work through three phases to become an elite member of a medieval guild. The first phase was as an apprentice, a male teenager who lived with a master and his family, usually in the attic, and learned the trade in the shop on the ground floor. He could not marry during the apprenticeship, and the time period of it varied from 2 to 7 years depending on the craft. Second, the journeyman or day worker was entitled to earn a salary, but they had to produce a masterpiece so that the guild would allow them to assume the title of master craftsman, and he would get membership into the guild. It's not easy to do because he had to do it on his own time. Sunday was the only day he didn't work sun up to sundown. So he used his own tools and raw materials with very little money, and they didn't want too many masters in a guild if the economy was tight. So not everyone became part of this third step, a master. Once the masterpiece was finished and the guild voted to accept him, he could become a master. These guilds prevented poor workmanship as each article was examined by the guild board before being sold. They regulated competition and forbade advertising, regulated prices, and forbade the sale of foreigners' work in order to preserve their monopoly. They also protected workers' rights, as working at night was forbidden, and no member could corner the market by purchasing a large supply of a product or commodity. This allowed them to protect the larger numbers of workers and to set a fixed price for products. Guilds also helped their members by paying for the funerals of poor members and aiding the surviving family members. They provided dowries, money, and goods a woman brings to the marriage for poor girls and gave health insurance and care for sick members and their families. They helped to construct churches and watched over morals of their members by instituting laws such as no gambling or usury, unreasonably high interest rates on loans. Lastly, guilds contributed to the emergence of lay education. There were no schools around except monastic schools, so joining a guild and learning a trade was the only education available to many. Guilds should remind you a lot of current labor unions, as they were in many ways the historical basis for today's unions. As we move out of the High Middle Ages and into the Late Middle Ages, the next 2 centuries were disastrous for the people of Western Europe. Three main occurrences mark this catastrophic period. First, the Hundred Years' War. Second, the bubonic plague or Black Death. And third, the Great Schism in the Church. The Hundred Years' War was actually a 116-year-long struggle between England and France, who were historic enemies. The origins of the struggle come from two places. First, land disputes. Both countries claimed Flanders, Aquitaine, Normandy, and Anjou. Second, the English claims to the French throne. Edward, son of Edward II and Isabella, was the heir to both the English throne through his father and the French throne through his mother. The French, unable to stomach an Englishman sitting on the French throne, chose another, Philip VI, to be their king. The war extended both countries to their financial breaking points. Both sides tried to manipulate public opinion, helping in the growth of nationalism. Nationalism is the strong belief that the interests of a particular nation-state are of primary importance. Also, it's the belief that a people who share a common language, history, and culture should constitute an independent nation free of foreign domination. Early success in the Hundred Years' War went to the English due to the development of the English longbow. It played a key role in securing the great English victories at Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt. The French cause seemed hopeless until the emergence of Joan of Arc, a teenaged peasant girl. Joan of Arc convinced French leaders she was divinely inspired to free France from English rule. French authorities gave her an army, and she forced the English out of Orleans. While Joan never fought in battle, she accompanied men as an inspirational mascot, brandishing her banner, not a weapon, outlined military strategies, and proposed diplomatic solutions to the British. She was later captured by the English and tried in an ecclesiastical court on 70 charges, ranging from sorcery to horse theft. However, she was only convicted of wearing men's clothing and of making claims that God had directly contacted her. Joan was offered life in prison if she admitted her guilt, but after she signed the paperwork, a few days later she put on her male attire and was considered a relapsed heretic who was burned at the stake. The Hundred Years' War came to an end, although not officially, around 1453 CE. The results were death, destruction, and further economic stress. At the same time, Europe had to deal with the Black Plague. The Black Death began when flea-infested rats traveled on ships from port to port, transmitting bubonic plague. It arrived in Europe by sea in October of 1347 when 12 Genoese ships docked in Sicilian port of Messina after their journey on the Black Sea. People who gathered at the docks to meet the ships were greeted with a horrifying surprise. Most of the sailors on the ships were dead, and survivors were very sick. They couldn't keep food down, were delirious from pain, and were strangely covered in mysterious black boils that oozed blood and pus. Authorities ordered the fleet of death ships out of the harbor, but it was too late. Over the next 5 years, the mysterious Black Death would kill more than 20 million people in Europe, almost one-third of the continent's population. Once bitten by a flea, a person showed symptoms within a week. They included fever, muscular pain, vomiting, growth of buboes in the armpit, neck, or groin area, black spots under the skin, and blood-filled lungs and eventual death. Today, scientists understand that the Black Death, now known as the plague, is spread by a bacillus called Yersinia pestis. The French biologist Alexandre Yersin discovered this germ at the end of the 19th century. They know that the bacillus travels from person to person pneumonically or through the air, as well as through the bite of infected fleas and rats. Both of these pests could be found almost everywhere in medieval Europe, but they were particularly at home aboard ships of all kinds, which is how the deadly plague made its way through one European port city after another. Not long after it struck Messina, the Black Death spread to the port of Marseille in France and the port of Tunis in North Africa. Then it reached Rome and Florence, two cities at the center of an elaborate web of trade routes. By the middle of 1348, the Black Death had struck Paris, Bordeaux, Lyon, and London. Today, this grim sequence of events is terrifying but comprehensible. In the middle of the 14th century, however, there seemed to be no rational explanation for it. No one knew exactly how the Black Death was transmitted from one patient to another. According to one doctor, for example, instantaneous death occurs when the aerial spirit escaping from the eyes of the sick man strikes the healthy person standing near and looking at the sick, and no one knew how to prevent or treat it. Physicians relied on crude and unsophisticated techniques such as bloodletting and boil lancing, practices that were dangerous as well as unsanitary, and superstitious practices such as burning aromatic herbs and bathing in rose water or vinegar. Meanwhile, in a panic, healthy people did all they could to avoid the sick. Doctors refused to see patients, priests refused to administer last rites, shopkeepers closed stores. Many people fled the cities for the countryside, but even there they could not escape the disease. It affected cows, sheep, goats, pigs, and chickens, as well as people. In fact, so many sheep died that one of the consequences of the Black Death was a European wool shortage, and many people, desperate to save themselves, even abandoned their sick and dying loved ones. Thus doing, Boccaccio wrote, each thought to secure immunity for himself. Because they did not understand the biology of the disease, many people believed that the Black Death was a kind of divine punishment, retribution for sins against God, such as greed, blasphemy, heresy, fornication, and worldliness. By this logic, the only way to overcome the plague was to win God's forgiveness. Some people believed that the way to do this was to purge their communities of heretics and other troublemakers. So, for example, many thousands of Jews were massacred in 1348 and 1349. Thousands more fled to the sparsely populated regions of Eastern Europe, where they could be relatively safe from the rampaging mobs in the cities. Some people coped with the terror and uncertainty of the Black Death epidemic by lashing out at their neighbors. Others coped by turning inward and fretting about the condition of their own souls. Some upperclassmen joined processions of flagellants that traveled from town to town and engaged in public displays of penance and punishment. They would beat themselves and one another with heavy leather straps studded with sharp pieces of metal while the townspeople looked on. For 33.5 days, the flagellants repeated this ritual 3 times a day. Then they would move on to the next town and begin the process over again. Though the flagellant movement did provide some comfort to people who felt powerless in the face of inexplicable tragedy, it soon began to worry the Pope, whose authority the flagellants had begun to usurp. In the face of this papal resistance, the movement disintegrated. The Black Death epidemic had run its course by the early 1350s, but the plague reappeared every few generations for centuries. Modern sanitation and public health practices have greatly mitigated the impact of the disease, but have not eliminated it. 2 in 5 of the Western European population died by the early 1400s. That's at least 20 million people. This was a pessimistic time period, with many refusing to plant fields because they probably wouldn't be there to harvest them. Thus, the population and economy were hard hit. Death was a daily part of life and often seen in the art of the day. Some lost faith in the church and abandoned their faith, saying, "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die." They grossly indulged in worldly pleasures. Lastly, in some ways, the Black Death led to the Protestant Reformation, which was a 16th century schism within the Roman Catholic Church that led to the creation of the Protestant branch of religion. This split occurred in part because priests refused to administer last rites for fear of catching the plague. They told laymen that anyone could issue last rites over their dead relatives during this time period. However, once the plague subsided, priests took back this privilege. When combined with the fact that many began to view the Catholic Church as both economically and morally corrupt, this contributed heavily to the Protestant Reformation of 1517. From the collapse of Roman authority in 476 CE to the upheavals of the late Middle Ages, Western Europe experienced a millennium of profound transformation. Geography shaped its boundaries and resources, while the fall of centralized rule ushered in centuries of political fragmentation, rural economies, and cultural shifts. Dynasties like the Merovingians and Carolingians sought to restore stability and revive the legacy of Rome, most notably under Charlemagne's reign, which blended political reform, educational revival, and religious authority. Yet the medieval world was never static. It faced Viking raids, internal rivalries, and the emergence of feudal and manorial systems that structured society into lords, vassals, clergy, and peasants. The Roman Catholic Church became both a unifying spiritual force and a powerful political institution, guiding cultural life and influencing governance across the continent. Periods of growth in the High Middle Ages brought agricultural advances, urban expansion, and the rise of guilds. But these gains were tempered by the devastating crises of the late Middle Ages, the Hundred Years' War, the Black Death, and deep divisions within the Church. By 1500, Western Europe had weathered immense challenges, forged enduring institutions, and developed cultural and political foundations that would shape the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the modern world. The Middle Ages were not merely a bridge between ancient and modern history. They were a dynamic era in their own right, defined by resilience, adaptation, and transformation.